Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast where we try and improve our FPL play through a more analytical approach. It's really nice to be back on the podcast, and I'm not joined by a normal host this week, but joined by Sertalp. Sertalp, how are you doing, mate?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, it's really nice to meet you because we've interacted on Twitter loads over the last year, maybe even 2 years. But it's great to properly meet someone, not in person, but meet them face to face.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure.
And yeah, how's things going in general and in FPL as well? How's your season been so far?
Yeah, in general, personally, I think I'm doing well, but I'm a little bit exhausted due to parenting.
Yeah,
We got our baby in March, so I'm just learning as I go. But due to parenting, it's a little bit tiring nowadays,
yeah,
and FPL is not going well, I can say. I mean, it's not the worst, obviously. There
mm,
are some ups and downs, but I had more downs than ups this season so
yeah,
far. Uh, but how is your FPL season going?
yeah. It's going. I think it's going well so far. I had a bad first 2 weeks, and then it's been fairly decent since then. I think my ranks, I think 700 or 800k, something like that, which feels good for this point in the season at this stage. And yeah, and
Yeah, that's really
congratulations on becoming a parent as well. That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I suppose just to introduce Sertalp as well, Sertalp runs FPL Optimized podcast with Baz, and then also is the creator of FPLOptimized.com, which a lot of you will have used before. So there's lots of interesting things we can ask him, and we'll show some of the data from that website and some of the tools you can use on it as well throughout the podcast. Sertalp's just a general kind of bit of a data genius from what I gather as well. What I'll do is, in terms of our last game weeks, we can actually just show one of those tools from the website in terms of the live game week. So sorry to have to show you this, Sertal. You might not want to look at this, I'm afraid.
It's okay. I'm ready.
So do you want to just kind of talk through this, Sertal, and what this kind of means?
Yeah, sure. Um, so this graph actually, so the idea came from like seeing the projected points on FBI Reviews website, and then I didn't know which games I should have been watching. I mean, I will talk about this probably within the episode, but I don't watch that much football. So I was like,
Mm,
if I'm playing FPL, I would like to watch, a game or two every week. So I was wondering, which game brings me the more upside.
mm,
So then the idea came to me that, oh, I can actually plot this with the time being the x-axis, and then y-axis will show me how much points I'm gaining uh, against the field. Um, so then this chart actually shows you how much point you are expected to gain or lose against the field. That's basically it. And field, you can define it as, top 1 million, top 1K, 100K, whatever. We also have the prime sample, which I use by default. These
mm,
are the most successful FPL managers in the last, few seasons. It's a list of managers that FPL research compiles actually.
mm,
So in this chart, then the yellow, this dashed line shows you where you are expected to gain or lose points against the field. But as we know, the reality is often much different than what we are expecting. The blue line, the blue solid line shows how much you actually gained or lost against the field. So if your blue line in general is on top of the yellow line, it means that you are having a better game week than you should have been getting.
yeah.
Especially, I mean, based on the projection models, I can say.
Yes. Yeah.
But
So
then,
is
as
the
you see here, yeah, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, is the yellow line based on FPL Review's free model? Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's also a functionality in FPL Optimize that you can actually load other models too, like FPL Reviews Premium model. You can load it if you want to use that one. But by default, when you visit, you are actually using the free data.
Mm. Yeah. Nice. And I guess that it also kind of shows you um, kind of your mood after a game week is massively determined by the last game. So, for example, on
Yeah.
yours here, you can say you started really well, so you're above expected the whole game week, and then even though you finished above where you expected, so the big picture is it was a better game week than expected. Even though that's the case, it feels awful because you didn't. I presume you didn't have any Newcastle players for that last game. Whereas,
Yeah,
if you reverse that game week, if Newcastle had played first on a Friday night and the last fixture had been whatever that 12:30 game is now, I can't remember now, all those 3 p.m. games, like you'd probably be quite buzzing right now that you actually made that comeback. So the order of the games like makes a massive difference because you raise your hopes and then it can completely swing
yeah.
in one game.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people always say that don't check your rank, mid-game week, it is misleading, but I always do
Yeah,
somehow. And
yeah,
you're right. I mean, this chart actually shows how I felt during the week. So I was really, buzzing mid-game week, and
not
then
too mood.
Newcastle game happened. So like, now I feel like my game week was, bad, even though I finished with a positive like increase, like I got a
Mm.
green arrow, but it felt like a big punch at the end of the game week. So I
Yeah.
still feel it.
And who was it you had in the 3 p.m. games there, set up on Saturday that got you that good start?
I don't know actually.
Yeah, or it might have been not having Alvarez, maybe.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. I don't have Alvarez. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had Son who scored
Oh, there you go.
goals this
Yeah.
game week,
Yeah.
which is always also interesting. But yeah, I had a good game week, and then it finished pretty average. It felt
Yeah.
like.
I'll switch over to mine, which is complete opposite. Well, kind of.
I
it
love it.
looks like I'm showing off now, doesn't it? But well, basically, it did as expected the whole way, but was slightly below. It was a bit underwhelming. I think maybe that was the 5:30 game on the Saturday that was underwhelming or something, and then didn't have Son or Madison, so I was like, it's really frustrating that they blanked, and then suddenly they. Son braces against Arsenal, but owners of Son, they probably got what they deserved after him blanking against Sheffield United. And I was all set. In my head, I was thinking, well, if Newcastle, because I'd Botman and Trippier, I was thinking, well, if they get a clean sheet, I'll probably go up to where I was expected. And then, yeah, the first half was crazy to already have a goal and 2 assists or something. Was
Yeah.
pretty ridiculous. So yeah, it also
It is.
tell you what I've done before is I've thought I'm having a bad game week. I'll just go on to FPL optimized, and maybe it won't be as bad as I expected. Then I've gone on and it was actually going worse than I expected. And I log on to make myself feel better, and then suddenly you're like, okay, actually no, it was even worse than I thought. So it's sometimes a good thing to look at. It depends.
Yeah.
But it definitely puts things into perspective because your rank can, particularly later in the season when you're looking at rank more, your rank can plummet, but actually it can be that everyone had 6 players playing in the 3 PMs and you only had 2. And yeah, if you're not
Yeah.
aware of that,
Mhm.
it kind of helps you to
Yeah.
understand.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this season, in general, is there anything that you'd kind of changed so far in terms of what you've done, or have you been pretty happy with your decision making?
I am happy with my decision making so far. I mean, it wasn't never the issue for me. I mean, everyone knows that I play analytically. I use analytics. I don't use much grass or like eye test. Um, so one thing that I am doing differently though, I'm playing with Fantasy Football Trout. He's kind of like helping me to make my decisions. So we are kind of we have the exact same team right now.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, I did this mainly because now being a parent, it was very time consuming. I realized that it will be the case throughout the season. So I wanted to have the flexibility of sometimes not paying attention to FPL and hopefully, throughout, doing everything for me. So far, I mean, it's good. So we both use optimization. We sometimes run our own optimization separately and then compare our results and then try to make a decision based on that. Obviously, some of the decisions we have made turned out to be really bad, like starting the season with Richarlison or Jackson.
Yeah.
They were like tough choices. And also, we were forced to go without Newcastle defenders this game week, even though like optimization was begging us to get Newcastle defenders early on. But yeah, I don't kind of like regret because with the information we had at that point, I think we gave the good decisions. But yeah, FPL is cruel.
Yeah, that was really cool. Yeah, and I did a similar thing. Well, I didn't start with Richarlison. I started with Havertz instead, and they probably got a similar score. And then I switched Havertz to Sterling, and he's also not returned since I've owned him. So
Yeah.
I've got that one position in my team where I've not got any points so far. But I feel like it's coming, and particularly the Sterling switch. Like Sterling's had plenty of chances, and also created plenty of chances for Jackson, who's missed them.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Jason missed a lot.
which is frustrating. But the Havertz one is one I think maybe that was a mistake. Just because I think I think I was probably too high on his expected minutes, considering he's now lost his place, and also was maybe too confident that he would just slot in as this main striker when Jesus was out at the beginning. Whereas I think after one game, or even in the first game, I think he's already playing in midfield. So I think I probably got that wrong. But yeah, it's kind of so much of it's about remaining level-headed and realizing, did you do the right thing with the information you had?
Yeah,
Even after the event,
exactly.
because I was thinking about this week, because a player, you can't just look at, for example, the chances a player has in a game week and use that as the measure of whether it was the right decision either. So, for example, with the Haaland and Son captaincy swing in game week 6, I
Hmm.
actually captained Haaland, but that's because I didn't own Son. I would have captained Son if I owned him. And I think you could look at that and say, Haaland had like 6 big chances, therefore Haaland was the right decision. But actually, Haaland missing those chances was unpredictable, but so is him getting that amount of chances, even though it's Haaland. So again, you just have to go back. What information did we have before that game week? No one was predicting Haaland to get something stupid like near to 2.5 xg in one game against West
Yeah,
Ham. So
yeah,
you can use that as more of a gauge, I guess, the amount of long term anyway, the amount of chances
yeah.
players get. But
You're
even
right.
for a one off game week, even just using xg to judge that is messy.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
then
Exactly.
you risk then never learning from your mistakes or never admitting you're wrong as well. That's what I find.
Yeah, kind of, maybe. But you're right. I mean, there's a hidden layer of the underlying numbers
Mm.
that, there's projection and the outcome, and that's what we only see, right? Like you check the pre-game week prediction and then you see the post-game week outcome, and you might think that, oh, choosing this player was a mistake. But then the underlying numbers sometimes they tell a different story.
Yeah,
Like you have mentioned, Haaland can easily overperform his predictions, but underperform, his underlyings,
yeah,
like turning them into actual goals. Like, yeah, that's part of FPL
yeah. I mean, just football. Football's such a random sport as
football.
well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Um,
is.
Great. I guess the first part of this podcast, what we'll do is I'll do a bit of a Q&A with you, Sertal, which is
Mm-hmm.
questions I've kind of prepared because I think people will be very interested in kind of your background, what that means for FPL, how you built the website or why you built it, etc. And then the second half of the pod, we'll talk more specifically about the upcoming game week and I think when to wildcard. They'll be the main two things. So I guess just firstly, I introduced you briefly before, but why don't you do a better job of that than I did? Who is Sertal? Where do you live? Who do you support? And how did you get into FPL as well?
Yeah, sure. And first of all, thanks for having me on this podcast again. I'm Sartab Chai. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, United States. I have been in United States for the last 11 years, roughly. I work as an operations research specialist, which is a fancy way of saying that I'm an optimization scientist, actually. So I got all of my degrees, undergrad, master's, and PhD in industrial engineering. And my focus area, like in terms of research, was using computational resources to solve optimization problems we encounter in real life.
Mm.
Optimization has lots of use cases, and I also work on a variety of different optimization problems at work. I do transportation optimization, routing optimization, manufacturing, scheduling, a little bit of finance. And well, as you know, lately I use optimization for fantasy sports,
Mm.
not only FPL, but like in general, other fantasy sports
Okay,
too.
cool. Yeah.
Um, I'm a big fan of both Galatasaray from Turkish league because of
Yeah.
my parents, and also Liverpool due to their 2005 Champions League final in Istanbul.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, these are the only two teams I actually follow.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. And yeah, so 2005 Champions League. Yeah. So I guess when you started supporting Liverpool, it was pretty good. Then you had a few years where it was pretty awful, and then you've had the last decade that's been pretty good again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the story is also interesting because we were watching the game at the high school dormitory, and so there was this big room where when everyone was entering, they were asking, which team you are supporting, and I realized that everyone was supporting AC Milan, and I was also like, I liked AC Milan at the time, but I felt bad that there are only a few like Liverpool fans
Yeah.
like watching, and I said, yeah, I also root for Liverpool, and then. I don't know if you remember the game, but
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Milan was winning 3-0 at
Mm.
halftime. So people were just like making fun of like me, saying that I picked the wrong team, and then Liverpool got 3 goals in the second half, and then eventually won the Champions League. So
Yeah.
I felt really great like at that time, and I said like, okay, this is my team in European competitions from now on.
And that just summarizes that game summarizes what we just discussed before in terms of the randomness of football. Because like AC Milan
Yeah,
were
yeah,
better in every single position, dominated the whole of the first half, and then the second half, Liverpool just they scored from long range. They won a penalty, and then Gerrard scored a header, which again from
yes,
long range for a header. Then you have the crazy
yeah,
Dudek save in extra time that 90% of the time that probably just goes in,
yeah,
and then even the penalty shootout, it's just crazy. Yeah, it just kind of sums up football so well, that match.
yeah,
And yeah, I
yeah,
guess
exactly.
I was interested as well in because I think most people who are interested in FPL from an analytics point of view probably have got into it in a similar way to me, where actually FPL was the first thing they were interested in, more football than FPL, and then probably played the game for fun more casually, and then got into analytics. Has that been the same for you, or because of your work? As soon as you started playing FPL, was it immediately from a kind of data standpoint?
Yeah, my journey is just totally like totally different. It's just the opposite, I can
Yeah.
say. So it started like this. So I was building some proof of concept projects related to football at work. So I was kind of like wanted to use optimization for football or like sports in general. So that because I mean, obviously sports is a very interesting sector. I mean, I talked about like routing, manufacturing, finance, but I mean they are all good and nice. But then when you talk to people about them, they just get bored if they're not
Mm.
from that sector. But sports is different. You can easily connect with people about what was the ideal decision for, let's say, like Liverpool to transfer this player. So I wrote a blog post on this, like how can you actually optimize transfers for clubs. So I used some like transfer market data. So this is the budget of the club, and these are the ratings from FIFA. So
Mm.
how can you actually increase the overall rating of the team with this limited budget? What's the optimal transfer? I published the blog post. I received a long email from Bas. At that time, I didn't know him. He's working at the marketing department of the company I work at. He told me, all the points that I got wrong. He said like, this is wrong, this is misleading. You should add something that FIFA ratings doesn't necessarily mean that it is translated into real life, blah blah. So I said, okay. I mean, I'm used to getting these kind of feedback from my PhD. So I said, yeah, okay, I can change it. So from after that, we started working together or like discussing in general, and we did a very successful project called venue optimization.
Mm.
uh, it was based on maximizing number of people attending venues, like attending these sports like competitions under social distancing rules. Because at the time, so there were lots of
Mm.
rules, and people were not allowed to go into venues, as you can remember. So we said, this is how you optimize it essentially. And then the same technique also got picked up by NFL, used for Super Bowl, for example.
Wow, that's
So it
fascinating.
was a very impactful project.
Mm.
um, and then we were talking, he mentioned that he plays a game called FPL, and he actually challenged me. He knew that I was going to use data if I play, and he said like, can you actually win against me if you use your fancy optimization tools? I said, yeah, I can. That's how I started. So, and then I learned about FPL. So even though I said that I'm a Liverpool fan, I wasn't really following Premier League that
Mm.
closely. I mean, obviously, maybe the season that Liverpool won the title, but besides that, I wasn't paying attention. And after started playing FPL, I started paying attention to games in general. And yeah, that's my route. So I started with analytics. I was using analytics my whole life, and then
Yeah.
eventually learned that, oh, this is an actually really cool problem. And the FPL is different from other fantasy sports, where the decisions you give now impact your entire season. Because in lots of like daily fantasy sports, you get to choose a new team like every week,
Sure.
but that's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
the case in
Mm.
FPL, which intrigued me.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it is pretty different in that way, actually. And I guess the other forms of not just FPL but the Sky game and others, they have that same element of you have transfers, but the most of the players you bring in, you're bringing in for the long term. Ultimately, it's completely different, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, that's such a different way to getting into FPL compared to most people. Have you beaten Baz most seasons or not?
I think I did. This is our fourth season. I think I won in the first 3 seasons, but this season he has a nice lead, so maybe he will win this season. We will see.
Just lulling him into a false sense of security before you.
Yes, maybe that.
Like a pool shark.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to that then, because one of the things I love about your guys' podcast is how different you guys are in terms of how you play. And Baz, I think he even says in the intro to your podcast, says something like, this is the podcast where we combine analytics with the eye test, and then he says data and grass, data or grass, or data and grass, etc.
Yes.
So I guess I wanted to ask you that question. Do you, when you're making decisions, is it purely data, or are there things you pick up from watching games, or in general that you think that models won't pick up, and someone who watches games who's good at it, will make good decisions as a result of? Or is it just purely a data game?
Yeah, a little bit tough to answer. I mean, the answer to that question that Bas asks at the podcast is like different for everyone. For me, like I play using only data. Like I watch games occasionally, like maybe a game every week, and I try to watch highlights of a few games, but I don't watch every game. I don't watch every player. I don't pay attention to every player. So I don't feel like my grass knowledge or eye test knowledge is enough to make any decisions based on that. So I kind of trust data. I mean, obviously models cannot get everything, perfect, but they're also using a set of like data points, and hopefully if you're paying attention, you can actually create a model that is probably better than best eye test person out there, because you are not only restricted to use stuff like XG or XA or something else. You can also use your expert view and include into the model. I mean, let's say that Son is playing in the number 9 position, what it means for the model. So you should be able to easily translate that into your prediction model and then actually make a prediction off of it. That's pretty much what eye test people do or grass people do. They're like tracking changes, how these players are playing. Ultimately, I believe that data can actually be much better than any like personal observation we can have. And I know that this is a very like big like argument here, like people might get upset on this, but like everything is data, and then we are making decisions based on data. And sports is no different in my opinion, but there are lots of sectors that resisted the change of embracing analytics, but then eventually like analytics caught up, and then nowadays as a company, if you are not using analytics, you are certainly behind everyone else. So I feel like we will arrive to a point where not using prediction data or projection will make you a worse FPL player unless they change rules somehow. So I believe in data. Maybe data is not ready yet, but I have full confidence in using data.
I guess I'm the same in the sense that I think 100% the best way to play the game is using data. And actually, when I watch football, I watch more football than you. But actually, when I'm watching it, I'm not thinking, how's this going to impact my FPL decisions? I'm watching it for enjoyment. So I don't even think about it at all. But I do think there are certain people who are better at the eye test, who will pick up on things like a player's position, or pick up on things that don't get picked up on in XG, for example, if a player's in good positions but not receiving the ball, for example. And that will add some value, I guess. But I think for me anyway, I can only talk from my own experience. I think if I try to make decisions based on what I'm seeing and discount data, I'm way more likely to just make biased decisions and make worse decisions personally. And the fact, like what we discussed before, the fact football's so random means there will always be people who don't use any data who do really well, and there'll always be people who use data who do really badly as well. So that keeps the game interesting regardless. And the main thing is people play the game in the way they want as well. But yeah, I guess kind of moving on from the podcast to the website fploptimize.com, which we showed some of the tools from earlier. I just wanted to kind of show you actually three of those tools, and for myself and for other people watching who might find it really helpful, just kind of talk through what they show and why you think it might be helpful for anyone who plays FPL. So what I've got here is this is the team of the year section within the FPL Optimized website. So this is although it's of the year, this is your team so far, and what I've got ticked there is relative gains. Can you kind of talk through what that means, and kind of looking at this, what do you kind of learn about your own team?
Yeah, certainly. Let me actually make the image bigger on my second screen so I can see the player names. So relative gain is this. So suppose you have Haaland is the perfect example for this actually. So suppose you have Haaland in your team and you're captaining him almost every week except one. So you think you are getting points, but so does everyone else. So it is not actually helping you to move like on the ranks. If you are like 3 million like me, if you captain Haaland, you probably still at 3 million rank, so nothing has changed. But like he got 20 points, then you feel good that you have a high score. But relative gain is how much you are gaining against the field. So then it becomes like this. So you multiply points, how many points that player got, multiplied with 1 minus or 2 minus if the captain, 1 minus the ownership. So suppose you have a player who is not your captain, like to keep it simple, who got 10 points and no one else has that player. You are keeping all those 10 points and then you are moving 10 points while everyone else stays in the same place.
Like in a draft format, it would be like that.
Yeah, exactly. But if 50% of the people have the same player, then you are only getting 10 multiplied with 0.5 because it's 1 minus 50%. Then you are only moving, in average, 5 points against the field. So there are people you move against, like 10 points. And then there are these people who move with you, other 50%. In average, you move 5 points. Then the team of the year is based on, well, if you are using the relative gain, so that Haaland is probably not helping you to move into the top ranks, but someone else is helping you. Like in my case, for example, I can easily tell, even without looking, that Mubemo is one player, such player that whose ownership is not that high, but he got lots of points. So when you multiply it with it, I'm sure Mubemo is in my like team of the year in terms of taking me to higher ranks, but Holland is not. And Holland is not also because I captain someone else in a game week, so that, as you know, it hurts you when you do that. And Holland goes
you've got a
big,
minus number on Haaland.
Minus number.
Was that
as the gain.
Was that Saka game week 1 set up?
I think so. Yeah.
Same. I captained Saka as well that week.
So then, as you see here, like I have like Morris and Jackson as my team of the year players, and then I don't have Haaland, which is expected, kind of.
Yeah, it's like it's really, I think it's just helpful to look at again to put your team into perspective. The similar with looking at the relative gain throughout the game week as well. But yeah, I thought this was a really cool tool actually, and I was similar to you. I think Mbeumo was my highest player, and again I had Haaland in the minuses because of that the one week the week I didn't captain him, which is hilarious. But I don't know. I guess would you just generally ignore EO when you play?
I do. In my opinion, ownership has some impact, or should have an impact in optimal play. But I feel like we are not at that point yet. So the only thing that we are doing right now is like using, let's say, FBI reviews data or other projection models, is we are betting on a biased coin. So that biased coin says that with the 51% probability, it will be heads, and then we hope that it will be heads. So I don't really use effective ownership in my decision making. Sometimes I just dread picking the low owned captain, but I mean it's a risk appetite thing. So I don't mind like choosing a captain, anyone besides Holland, but people like there are lots of analytical managers who are using these kind of like projection data and everything, but when it comes to captaincy they're like, no, I'm going to play safe, I'm going to pick the player who's owned the most, it will be Haaland. Like in my mind there's no question, but I mean now we are facing a something similar, right? Like, are you going to pick Morris as your captain or Haaland? Is a big split, I feel.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we'll come to that later on as well.
Yeah.
And also I'd say, just by the way, for people listening to this podcast rather than watching, you'll still be able to follow this along fine, but we're showing quite a lot of graphics, so it might be worth watching on YouTube as well, but should still be helpful. Kind of moving on to the next thing, and again, I was just having a look through the website earlier today, and this actually kind of confirmed when I ran my team and a couple of other people's teams through it, including your own, what I thought in terms of clean sheets this season not being that valuable. I guess for those listening, what you can see here is a spider graph. Is that what it's called?
I think so, or radar chart, yeah.
Radar chart, yeah, that shows the amount of points you've got from your captain, from clean sheets, goals, assists, and bonus. And if you're watching here, what I've done is I've compared Seb's team to Luke's. I've left our teams out of this. What you can see here is that Seb's way higher on captaincy. So Luke's got his captaincy wrong more times than Seb. I wonder that must be the Son week, I guess, that's determined that. Where I
Maybe,
guess
yeah.
that Seb would have stuck with Haaland. That would be my guess. Whereas Luke's got way more assists than his team, and Seb's got a couple more clean sheets. But yeah, I think this is just an interesting one as well. Is that fairly self-explanatory there, Sertalp? And the percentage it's showing, is that the percentage of players who could have achieved that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so these are the percentage of players you own who end up with getting a goal or an assist or clean sheet, and I'm only counting the players that who are relevant in this case. Like for example, for clean sheet, it's only the defenders and goalkeeper
Yeah.
you have. It doesn't. I think it doesn't include like midfielders. Definitely not forwards, but probably not midfielders too. And also for goal, it is only tracking forwards and midfielders because these are the people you are bringing to your team for the goal potential, right?
Yeah.
There could be some defenders you own for maybe attacking returns, but I'm focused on midfield forwards for the goal, um, and bonus includes every player in your team. So maybe you are bringing players who get lots of bonuses like Trippier. So the season I created this chart, I think these were the highest values I observed, like in terms of like clean sheet percentage or goal or assist. And then as you can see, we have like 60% as the best clean sheet target. But for captaincy, it was only 70%. And you can see that SAP has a higher percentage than that. But
Yeah.
I think as the season goes on, people usually fall
Yeah.
within these lines. And also like there are some players who get multiple goals. It's counted as only one. So
Sure.
did your player get a goal or not? That's the only question I'm checking here.
Yeah. Got you. And do you know, when you initially created this chart, did it change your decision making at all in terms of where you put more of your money within your squad? And also, secondly, probably one of the reasons we definitely will see less. There's more like to be less clean sheets this season is the greater stoppage time, which is the referees have kept doing. I think a lot of people thought they might fade that out because of them adding more on for time wasting and things like that. Has that actually come into your mind in terms of decision making, in terms of who you prioritize, or do you just let the model account for that because it will in terms of adding on those minutes?
Uh, for the first part, I think first time I created this chart, I realized that my assist percentage was quite low compared to other like similar managers I play against. So I was just wondering why that could be. Assists, as you know, are more difficult to predict compared to goals. So from that perspective, I was thinking maybe the models are like more confident in terms of like who will get the goals, so that they are suggesting me players who will hopefully get the goals, but not necessarily assist numbers. And then for a casual manager, maybe they are just checking the total FPL points every player generated, and they are going with the highest, which might have lots of assist points to that point, and then might keep generating more assists
Yeah.
might be the explanation. But regarding clean sheet, yeah, I think I played with three defenders like every game week so far. I mean, I wasn't really lucky with getting clean sheets in the first place too,
No.
but I think that. I mean, longer games impacted projection data a little bit. And then now optimal solutions usually involve like three defenders in most game weeks.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, one of the other things I was interested in asking you, um, we've got our kind of predicted versus realized data for the season. I think I might show that at the end instead. But you've done quite a lot of work with FPL Chase, who you had on your podcast last week, which is a really
Mm-hmm.
good listen, with regards to comparing different models as well. And I'd love to discuss that with you because I think that's something that I think a lot of people have questions about. Because for me, I'm similar to a lot of people where I use kind of analytics for FPL and that's it. I'm not particularly. Um, I've never used it as part of my job. I don't naturally have a very kind of like
Mm-hmm.
mathematical kind of brain, but I've kind of learned to understand it and to use models for FPL. But I don't understand like I know the basics in terms of how it applies minutes, how it applies things like clean sheet odds, um, historic underlying data, etc. But you still got big differences between different types of models. What are the main reasons for those differences? Why models disagree? And I'm also going to bring up a graphic now that shows um,
Mm-hmm.
comparisons of different models so far this season in terms of different positions, and it shows how accurate they've been so far. Can you also talk us through that graphic and discuss what differences you
Yeah.
tend to see between models by position as well?
Yeah, sure. Um, well, as we know, models are not perfect. And I should also mention that I'm not an expert in prediction models or predictive analytics in general. My expertise is mostly on prescriptive analytics, basically
Mm.
optimization, simulation, these kind of decision making tools. So at work, for example, usually the people who generate these kind of data are actually giving us the model or at least the, projections. Suppose we are trying to optimize the ticket prices for a sport club, which we did in past. Um, and then they are giving us a model. Like they are saying that if you set it to this price, this is how many tickets you are expected to sell. If you set it to this price, and this
Mm-hmm.
is how it will affect it. So then you're using that knowledge to kind of optimize, what's the optimal ticket price in this case? Like you probably want to set it high, but not too high so that, the attendance will be low. And so I actually asked if anyone can help me to measure the accuracy of these models because I got the optimization model down, but I need to know which model is more accurate. And we kind of always knew that FBI Review is one of the best models out there, simply because the time he spent building that model. Well, even the model is named massive data, so you can kind of like feel that it is like a massive model, so that you can trust it more. But we wanted to see how they compare against each other, and I didn't have any idea how good or bad other models are, like
Mm.
compared to FBI Review. So then this chart actually shows the mean squared error, and it's comparing prediction to the actual outcome. So we talked about the hidden layer, the underlying numbers, but we are comparing what was the prediction and what the outcome was.
Mm.
Um, as you see, for every position, there is a better model. Like for example, in terms of forward projections, Fantasy Football Scott is doing better than FBI Review until now. But if you look at the every player in the game, then FBI Review's error rate is lower. Um, these kind of stuff, well, might happen due to uh, obviously maybe let's talk about this. So maybe the modelers spend more time modeling that particular aspect
Mm.
so that they are better at predicting those. It could be also the variation in football as we talk with you. So maybe like Holland got lots of XG in a game, and then if you predicted a high XG for Holland in this game week, it will reduce your error quite a bit, so that you might think that, oh, okay, my model is doing perfect, but it was just a fluke. So
Mm.
that the small sample size is very relevant here. So we are hoping that as the time like season goes by, these ranks between these models will converge to somewhere. I mean, FBI Review wasn't the best model for the first, I think, 4 weeks, but then after maybe game week 5, he got into the first place, and it is now at the first place right now. But we will see. I mean, the error rates are close, but models are not perfect, so you are kind of trying to
Mm.
see what they are good at, and if there is any signal you can pick up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, for like those people listening, it's basically comparing. There's 7 different models there: FPL Team, Draft Hound, Fantasy Football Fix, Mikhail Topvan's model, Fantasy Football Hub, Scout, and then FPL Review. And yeah, it's like so far for forwards, it's and for goalkeepers, it's Review that's been the most accurate in predicting. In fact, Scout just ahead of Review in terms of forwards. For midfielders, there's a few that are doing better than others. Whereas for defenders, I think it's probably either Fix or Review from looking at that.
Review.
So but it'd be interesting to see long term which ones are better. And yeah, and also like different, all these websites will have a different amount of budget and resource they're putting into doing this as well. So it's not a criticism of any of them at all. And like it's great. It's great that it's becoming more mainstream, that people have access to these models as well, and they're all doing really good work. To kind of because I think a lot of people, it's not just that they think that the model will make them make better decisions, but they enjoy the process of it as well, of like using it to challenge themselves, using it almost as if it were a friend you were kind of running your team by, or like some people just really enjoy sticking to it rigidly. So I just think it's particularly this season, it's kind of good to see that become more mainstream and normal for people to do as well. Yeah. So I think that's really interesting. And so one other thing I was going to ask you, Sertalp. So this is you've just started doing that this season, is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, sure. So I was going to ask what it was like long term, but yeah, we'll find that out at the end of the season, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, we had some data from last season. We, I think, started around game week maybe 6 last season, started to collect this data, but then it wasn't very consistent because the websites, they changed their structure a little bit. Like, every few game weeks they come up with a new kind of like structure to share the data. So you need to be actively fixing the script. So I didn't pay too much attention to that last season. But at the beginning of this season, we made sure that we have all the scripts ready so that we are getting this data actually 4 times a day from every resource, and using the closest one to the deadline when we are, trying to measure the accuracy. And I should also mention that Neil Rankin ZA on Twitter is actually generating these visuals for me. He's actually doing this for a living, this kind of like predictive analytics. So I'm just passing him the data at this point. And well, I will add this as a side comment, but people are often obsessed about the predictions in general because they are coming from, as you mentioned, so they have been playing FPL. And then they realize that, there are these projection models I can use. So they are kind of like obsessed on those. But I am an optimization scientist, so I'm more obsessed about optimization. I enjoy the process. I don't care too much about the data, to be honest. And well, whether you are using Mikhail Toklam's data or FBI Review or like Fantasy Football Scott or whatever, I am more interested in whether you are optimizing that or not. And so a person can even come up with their own made up numbers, like projections. You can say that I'm sure Haaland will get 2 goals this game week. That's how I feel. That's the vibes I have. Still, and you're, let's say, predicting Haaland to get a goal and an assist, and then this player to get a clean sheet, this player to lose their clean sheet, whatever. So then again, still, this is a big optimization problem. You can even use optimization for this kind of like made up nonsense data, if you will, and optimize it, because it's not very obvious. Like, even if you know that Haaland will get 2 goals, doesn't mean that he's necessarily optimal, because maybe with his price, you will get 2 other players who will, in combination, will get 3 goals. So that's what I was trying to tell people with little success in these last seasons, that optimization piece is much cooler than getting the answer actually correctly. So but I mean, people are not very interested in that. Maybe it's a kind of like a research interest from my side.
Yeah, not many people use the word cool to describe analytics or data, do they? We're on our own there. Yeah. Cool. I thought we'd move on to kind of some more discussion about the actual upcoming game week and the current state of FPL. So what I've got here is some data from Rob T FPL on Twitter. Give him a follow if you don't already. Anyone who's listening, he basically posts a lot of clean sheet odds. He posts often the league table and how projections for the end of the season have changed based on the most recent results, and just some really interesting stuff to look at in terms of the big picture. What you can see here is based on sportingindex.com, which I think is to do with like market odds. You can see the projected amount of goals for each team within this game week, as well as their clean sheet percentage. And I guess to put this into context first, Sertat, where are you up to in terms of this game week? Are you have you got 2 transfers? Are you eyeing up a particular move?
I have two free transfers. I haven't used my transfers yet. I don't know which players I will get. Well, obviously, optimization model wants me to get 2 players who will double this game week. But so I was also kind of like running these solves with the assumption that I will use my wildcard in game week 9-ish because my team is not the best. But yeah, I mean, wildcard timing it certainly impacts what the optimal decision is for this game week.
Yeah, I'm the same. So I've got 2 transfers. At the moment, which we'll discuss in a moment, I'm planning on saving my wildcard, although I'm open to using it earlier. But if I run a solve with a wildcard in 9 or 10 or 8, it wants me to buy Trafford and Morris. Whereas actually, if I set it up with no kind of wildcard locked in at all, it either just wants me to buy some solves. It wants me to buy a single game week player, but in most of them, it just wants me to buy Trafford and to completely ignore Morris. So that's the first thing I'd say for this upcoming game week is with Morris, based on data, he's the best captain, or at least very close to Haaland, depending where you think the minutes are. So he's one of the best options, but actually because of the team he plays for, it's just really not a straightforward decision because for most people it's then a transfer out straight afterwards. So and that has a value to it as well. Whereas if you're wildcarding straight after, he becomes a potential transfer in, and becomes a transfer in because of that. But if this doesn't include Luton's second game against Burnley because I don't think it's updated with the odds yet. But even against Everton, like one of the worst defences in the league, Luton are projected 0.78 goals. But yeah, again, it's just the fact it's 2 close to 90 minutes, and the fact he's on penalties means you might get something. But I think even if you've got Morris, you shouldn't. If he scores 1 goal in 2 games, that's a massive success if you have Morris, because that's probably 1 goal in 2 games if he plays more than 60 minutes in both. And let's say he gets 1 bonus, that's 9 points just from 1 goal. So I think you bring him in with those expectations, knowing that that's a success. It's just or even one assist. Like if he gets bonus points, could be like considered a successful captaincy or a successful buy, depending how other players do. So I just think there's a lot of stuff on Twitter around, it's ridiculous that suddenly people think a Luton player's worthwhile just because he's got a double. That's not true. Like it makes total sense that he's one of the best players for this game week. But that's the key thing. It's this game week. Yeah. And so for a lot of people, it doesn't make sense. And that's what people need to think through. They've got to look at the big picture of their team.
Yeah, agreed. Yes, certainly.
And kind of in relation to that, actually, the one thing that really stood out to me when I looked at this graphic is that Everton's clean sheet odds at 46%. Like that really surprised me. Even against Luton, I was surprised they were that high. And that's often, again, where data can be helpful because I mean, for things like odds, there are, probably hundreds of staff members and all this like data that gets piled in to kind of make these decisions. For me to say that just based on my judgment of what I've watched that I think it's lower or higher than that, I think is just ridiculous. But yeah, well, you could make a lot of money if you were able to just judge it that way. So yeah, 40%, 6% is surprising, but then what I do with that is I think, well, that's just the way it is. I don't think that's surprising, therefore that's got to be wrong. I think that's where data can be really helpful because it can help you to properly understand these things and make me realise actually I probably just don't actually understand how bad Luton are attacking them.
It is impressive that like we are thinking of captaining a player where the opposition has the highest clean sheet percentage of the game week. I think like even Manchester City is lower, right? 44%, but it's only 1 game, so that maybe like in 2 games the rate goes down. Like probability of getting at least 1 goal is not too bad, and that's why the prediction model wants Morris as the captain, or I should say like racing against Haaland for captaincy. Yeah,
and like I also think I just think psychologically, if you've got Morris and Haaland, it's an easier game week to go against Haaland because if he's got a second match. And I know that's not logical, but psychologically it's easier to do. I think maybe if you're in mental health Like for example,
Yes.
when I captained Saka in game week 1, the fact that Haaland was playing on the first night and was playing against Burnley, that was scary to do because you know that in one day you could be like 20 points behind everyone already on the first after one
True.
game of one game week. Whereas I think with this, even if Haaland hauls, it's very little hope, but you have a little bit of hope to hold on to. And actually, we've got one more fixture. You never know. So
It's
I
more
think
painful even. Like,
it's drawn out.
you're hoping that the second game things will turn and then it doesn't.
Yeah, maybe long term it's just false hope, but yeah, so something like that does happen. But there's always that chance, isn't there, with Haaland? That's not how you play the game. Thinking about what can happen is what's most
Hmm.
likely.
Hmm.
Another thing that stood out to me here is just Man United 1.95 odds of scoring a goal, and that's against Palace, who are a decent defence, decent enough. Were very good last year, in fact, in terms of underlying data. So I think people have got Rashford and Bruno. Just stick it out with them, and just that's one of the reasons why I just don't think it's probably one of the reasons why it's the worst double game week ever, because from Luton there's only really Morris that's viable, or Kabore if you already own him, or any other player that you already happen to own. And then from Burnley, you've like again none of the midfielders are really viable because there's so many good midfielders in the game, and similar with forwards, like no one's going to be selling Haaland for a double game week. Most people aren't set up with the budget for a third forward to bring in, so it's not just the teams that make it the worst double game week ever. It's kind of the
Yeah.
context of the game, isn't it? Um,
Yes.
what do you think are your most likely moves to help if you were to guess what you end up doing tomorrow or on Saturday morning?
Yeah, it depends on like who's injured or not. I wasn't following news very closely, but I saw a few like yellow flags around like around my team. Um, I think Model wanted me to sell one of my goalkeepers, I think Turner, to get the Luton's goalkeeper. Um, I'm not sure. I think I'm more likely to spend both of my free transfers this game week. Like if I actually decide to wildcard in game week 9. But yeah, I don't know which player it will be for the second transfer.
Sure.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, their projections are only good for this game week, obviously, and even
Yeah.
that is questionable. But yeah, let's see. I'm kind of like waiting until deadline to see which player will be the optimal move.
Yeah. I mean, I was saying Trafford before he plays for Burnley, but it's actually Kaminsky who's actually slightly ahead who plays for Luton. But I mean, when you can't remember the name of a player who you might be bringing in, that's where you're kind of panicking a bit. I think I've done that with players. I've had to Google what they look like when I've realised I own this. I forgot Kabore. I have absolutely no idea what he looks like. But
Yeah.
I'll find out soon when he scores. A brace in the double game week, and we'll be laughing. Um,
Yeah, it is just like my wife playing FPL the season 2 seasons ago. Like she had
yeah,
lots of players in her team that, and we were watching the game, and I was like pointing out, oh, this is the player you have in your team, and she's like, oh, I didn't know what he looked like,
yeah,
but yeah, that's essentially the same for us for Luton players, I guess.
yeah. I've been playing the Rugby World Cups on at the moment. I've been playing that fantasy game, and I don't know anything about rugby. I just quite enjoy watching. I quite enjoy watching big games of any sport, and kind of getting into like a World Cup. So I thought I'll play the fantasy game, and it'll give me some interest in some of the games, but just purely making decisions based on the odds.
Yeah.
Basically, I'm doing fairly well for that reason, probably. Um, but yeah, I have no idea what any of my players look like until sit down and watch a game. Um,
Yeah.
so let's move on to kind of more beyond this game week. You mentioned before that you might wildcard in game week 9 setup.
Hmm.
Is that how likely do you think you are to do that? And has anything changed that in terms of the results last night with them potentially now being a later double
Hmm.
game week for Brentford and City? Has that changed things at all?
Yeah, I can actually see the merit in wildcarding later, maybe game week 19. I think you will talk about that one.
Mm,
Later wildcard has some value, that's for sure. It's just difficult for me to actually estimate, what the impact would be. There are a few models which has the season-long projections. I think Fantasy Football Scott has that they provided.
mm,
I was just thinking of using their projection and see if the game week, like, I don't know, like 17, 18, 19, like using my wildcard will have an impact. But for this, short term horizon, I tried every game week to see what's the impact of a wildcard. And game week 9 seemed like the best for my team because then I kind of like dead end my team, and then make transfers this game week, bring doubling players, and then same thing with the game week 8. And then after game week 9, I can actually start with a clean team. I can bring Salah, whose fixtures will turn really good, and then it will stay good for a while. Yeah, game week 9 wildcard is very possible for me. I will say maybe 60%.
Yeah, I would guess you have quite a big decision to make there in terms of whether you have Haaland or not.
I do.
In that team. Because I kind of think, but this is just based on the souls I run. So like, because I've run some for my own team, anticipating not wildcarding soon, and also just seeing what it looks like from 8 to 9 in terms of an optimal wildcard. And for my team with my budget, like it always involves selling Haaland or him not being in that team when I wildcard. So I think if it's there, I would just be brave and go with it. And there's a few reasons why this is going to be really unpopular. Why I think it's like people want to hear more than just the numbers say so. But if you actually look at game week 8 to 15, the fixtures are absolutely horrendous for Haaland. They're basically as bad as they can be. And people will say, "Oh, Haaland can score against anyone," which is true. But he's ultimately less likely to score against these teams. He's got Arsenal, Brighton, Man United, then Bournemouth, which is great. Then Chelsea, Liverpool, Spurs, Villa. It's basically 7 of the kind of best 8 teams, apart from Newcastle, within 8 game weeks. So I just think if there's a time to do it, now is the time to do it. The fact that also coincides with Salah having such good fixtures, like makes it a viable thing. And also, in the weeks where if you don't know Haaland, you'd have to captain someone else. There's one week where Son's the best captain. There's one week where even Bruno or Rashford might be the best captain as well. And so it's just not having Haaland allows you to kind of permanently have those players and maybe have a team with Salah, Son, a United player, maybe even the budget for Trippier. So it allows less kind of intricate moves during that time period as well. Whereas I think a lot of people who have Salah and Haaland, they will be kind of moving those midfielders around a lot. And obviously that's using transfers. And I would just say that that whole argument of, well, Haaland can score 5 goals in a game week. Yeah, like we know that's true. Like Salah can also do that. We know that's a possibility. But you've just got to kind of, in this case, I would just go with the numbers. And for my particular team at the moment, unless anything changes in terms of injuries and stuff, that will involve selling Haaland in 9 and doing Sterling, and for probably Alvarez or maybe even Nunes if he's playing regularly by then, and doing Sterling to Salah. And yeah, it will definitely be scary. And it could absolutely destroy my season. But I just think if that's the EV is there, that's when you do it. And I guess the last thing I would say is very much a unique situation. Like wouldn't even consider selling Haaland most of the time. But the fact is the fixtures are so bad. I think he's only the best captain in 2 out of these 8 game weeks. So, and I think other people will captain elsewhere as well. So even going against him, that makes it less scary if his EO's 150% rather than 180%, for example, also. So yeah, that's why I do it. And I just think the upside is there. But it's very much, for me, like you have Salah during that period. And it's whether you have Salah or Salah and Haaland. Whereas I think a lot of people are looking at it as, you have Haaland and do you bring in Salah as well? Whereas I think it should be the other way around. I think the discussion's there, but the discussion starts with Salah. And you have Salah for that period, and then you maybe go without Haaland, which for my team I think works. But it'll be scary. I guess one thing that changes it as well compared to last year is last year if you took Haaland out, you lose a load of value, whereas this year because everyone had him at the beginning, you also don't lose any team value by doing it. And I guess that's a small thing that makes an impact as well. He'll just be the same price when you buy him back as when you sell him. Did you have anything to add particularly on these fixtures set up?
No, but I agree with your comments about selling Haaland in general. I mean, their fixtures are obviously not the best, and it might be a suitable time to sell him. And I know that people are talking about this, that he can, as you mentioned, he can go big, and even if the fixture is difficult, that's certainly a possibility, but less likely compared to let's say Sheffield United or Luton Town.
It's game week 11 that's scary. But in Bournemouth, but then Salah's got Luton. It's like the best possible fixture for Salah. There's just lots of little things like that. It just makes me think, actually, I think I probably will go for it.
Yeah.
Even that, if Salah happened to have Brighton or whoever that week, Spurs, Man United, even that would be a huge deal. But the fact that Salah's also not as good as Haaland, but also a great captain, again, that it's just I feel like everything's just fallen into place for it to become viable, basically.
Yes, I agree. And it will probably, make or break our season. Like we can maybe make up to against the field by going against Holland, but it can also finish the season early. So when we were talking, so like as for a similar decision with Trout, he said that, do I prefer a slow that or a fast one? And I pretty much prefer a fast one. Like I don't
Yeah.
want to like spend like all the remaining, I don't know, like 30 weeks and slowly losing against the field. I would prefer to lose a lot of rank in one game week and then
Yeah.
maybe play more freely for the remaining one.
Yeah, and if Haaland breaks the Premier League record and scores 6 goals in a game for the first time in history, then
Yeah, we will be there.
We'll just say variance, mate.
Yes.
Before we move on to some questions to finish, I just wanted to quickly talk about that late wild card. And I was going to say it's kind of too early to be thinking about it because it's so far on the season, but it might impact whether you wild card now. So this is just the fixtures basically for City and Brentford during that period where Man City and Brentford have that blank because of Man City playing in the Club World Cup, I believe it is. So they blank in 18, but then in game week 20, according to Ben, who's the best person at predicting fixtures, they think it's pretty likely that they'll double in game week 20. So you've got a blank in 18 and then a double in 20, which for Brentford would be Man City and Crystal Palace, and for Man City would be Sheffield United and Brentford. So particularly for Man City, that's a great double, and straight away you think that's where you triple captain Haaland if it happens. But I just think, with wild cards, it could work really well because you can start to lose those players. Particularly Brentford players have got Villa, that's tricky, so you can sell one there, sell another one in 18, and then boost your EV in 18 overall. You can even sell Haaland in 18, wildcard him in 19, and then you've got triple Brentford, triple City for game week 20. An argument against that is actually that both teams, I'm only showing 2 here, but both teams actually have good fixtures going into 18. So that's an argument against it because you think actually for those fixtures, people will have them anyway, but it's just the blank that makes it tricky. People have to bench them there and then buy extras in 19 and 20. So I just think for my team anyway, when I run solves, I'm only gaining like 10 to like 13 EV from wildcarding now. And I just anticipate actually it might be bigger during this period for that reason. So that's the reason why I'm willing to hold out and hope that this works out to be better based on the fixtures around this period as well, with a couple of swings going into the new year. And I just think if people have wildcarded earlier, I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes a trend, the idea of free hitting in 18, just because we know there'll be less doubles this week. This is something that Ben mentioned to me actually. I hadn't thought of this until he mentioned it. But again, because those fixtures are good for City and Brentford leading into it, you could free hit 18. And then you've got them for the double after that as well. But we still need to know if that's announced in 20. I just think it's worth considering if people are umming and ahhing over whether to wildcard now, and it's a close decision. It might be that this potential gain here is enough to hold off. That's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that, both wildcard is a valid strategy, but also free hit 18, that makes lots of sense to me. And also, like, people are sometimes a little bit scared using their free hit in a blank game week as opposed to a double game week. But I think it might be a viable strategy. I mean, after all, we will all have Brentford and City players leading up to that game week, so why not use your free hit? Probably it will be even it will bring a sufficiently good expected value if you use your free hit there. And I can certainly see that why that's a possibility.
Sure. I think for me the whole thing becomes more likely as well because I generally, not always, but generally don't tend to own a lot of City players outside of Haaland. So maybe I'll have a defender. But so if you're the kind of player who you love when City have great fixtures to triple up on them, that's when actually free hitting 18 might be the right plan for you, for example. But that free hit discussion, we'll come to that when we get to it. But the potential wild card there is one that might mean it, for some people it's worth holding off in more recent weeks. We've run over a bit, Sertal, but we've just got a few questions left, if that's okay, if you've got time.
Certainly.
So I've got a few questions from Twitter, but there's a couple in the chat as well, actually. Progression says, No, that's just this. This isn't the question. It's just a bit of love for you. Love your coverage of model accuracies and the EV attack defense. Tick of the season. Some of the most useful FPL content each week. Um,
Yeah.
there you go. Lovely. And there's also a love heart, but that's from FPL Optimized, so a little bit biased. Fatality says, "What do you think of the guy using Chat GPT to pick his team?" I've not actually seen that, but I'm definitely going to check that out. It's a YouTube channel, apparently.
I think I have heard of it before.
Yeah.
I briefly checked it. People also ask me if they can use ChatGPT like in place of optimization all the time, not only in fantasy context
Yeah.
but in other contexts too. The problem is ChatGPT is a language model. It's not an actual AI, right? So it's not able to do this kind of like actual computation, and optimization is particularly a very difficult field. Um, like for example, the optimization of when to wildcard takes so much time. Like you can even run it for a full day, like 24 hours, your CPU running at 100% utilization through the day, and you can still be running that model the following day. it's that it's that difficult. And if sometimes you think that, yeah, maybe, ChatGPT will find a way. It is probably using some kind of heuristic approaches, and then it's like maybe, picking the players with the highest expected value. I don't know how they're using it right now, but suppose like if I feed it with the FPL reviews projections, and if I tell the tool that, can you give me the, optimal decision here, who's the optimal player to transfer, it's probably oversimplifying the problem. That's not how we use it. We know exactly how we can solve this problem. ChatGPT is very useful for lots of stuff that is not structured enough so that you cannot actually define the problem, or it is difficult to find an exact information you are looking for. But for structured problems, like optimization, FPL optimization, it's also same for like traveling salesman problem, for example. We have optimization techniques that can optimize hundreds of thousands of like nodes within like under a second in your like iPhone. So algorithmic approach for these kind of problems are much better right now. And ChatGPT is, if even if it is generating stuff, it is probably far from optimal, is how I see it. And if ChatGPT is able to provide these answers, it shouldn't, yeah, I mean, it's like technically is impossible for it to generate the optimal solution in a reasonable time, while we are just like spending 8 hours or like 20 hours to find the optimal solution. So oversimplifying the problem. But again, we talked about this, but in FPL or in football, variance is so high that maybe the picks that ChatGPT comes up is doing much better than
Yeah.
my 24-hour optimized team. So
Yeah.
it's
Sounds
difficult
fun.
to assess. Yeah.
The like little projects and experiments like that are fun though for FPL. Like I used to, this would have been like 3 or 4 years ago now. There was a guy on YouTube called FPL Dare, I think his name was, and he literally had like a wheel or a box where he pulled things out, and they had different dares for each week. So one would be say something
Oh,
like play your triple captainship, or captain a defender, captain your keeper, transfer out your highest value player. He had 38 different ones, and we'd draw one out each week. And the first year he did it, he finished really high, like top 10. It might even be top
really?
10k. Yeah, yeah. Just a couple of
Oh
things
my
happened where
God.
he drew out like sell your most expensive player, and he had to sell Salah, for example. But it just coincided with like 4 game weeks where Salah blanked. There were just a few things, and then the second year he did it, he did terribly. But yeah, it was good fun. Um, yeah, we'll just do some. There's just a few quick fire ones from Twitter that we'll just run through to
Sure.
finish. So one from Pete at FPL Marmalade, great name, jammy player probably. You clearly like using modelling and Python to solve FPL problems. Why waste time, so to speak, on FPL and not do it for other fantasy sports / football like DraftKings, where you could probably make a living from it? Yeah, what's your thoughts on that setup? Because you mentioned you do play other fantasy sports earlier.
I I I actually do now. In past, I wasn't able to do it because my visa status in United States
Okay.
prevented me to have any other income sources, including betting or fantasy games, besides my actual job. But that changed. So now I'm able to play other fantasy games too. And yeah, I'm actually trying my chances in other things too. But I mean, people sometimes think that I'm wasting my time in FPL in general because I'm trying so hard to optimize these teams. I'm sharing them, and then maybe sometimes they're doing really bad, so they're kind of like maybe feeling bad for me. I should just want to mention that. I mean, I think my purpose in FPL was introducing optimization and how cool optimization is to people. I mean, we have been talking about optimization or the optimal solution throughout the last seasons. I mean, as always comes up with a weird tweet about like criticizing optimization or optimal solution, and then we start talking about for a week. Usually happens in an international break. So that's actually very useful because I ended up getting some messages from like high school students who are applying colleges that they chose operations research or industrial engineering as their major because they found this whole thing very cool. And I got an email from a parent of a 12 years old who's developing his own prediction model, and he wanted to use my optimization model. So he was following the tutorials. I mean, things like these are much more. So it's like instant gratification. So
Yeah.
I enjoy hearing about it. I prefer like getting these kind of like messages, emails to getting a 10K finish,
Yeah.
probably, or even like a 1K finish.
Yeah, well, you're definitely doing a very good job of it. Yeah, a lot of people really value what you do on Twitter. That's great. We actually have a question from Baz, who you do your podcast with, who says, who is ahead in your head-to-head competition? I presume I know the answer to that one.
He's ahead, yeah, 5-1. He's leading, but yeah, that
Is
will
that-
change hopefully.
Okay. What's that head-to-head to competition? What's that to do with? Predicting results?
Yeah, head-to-head competition. Yeah, we're just checking
head-to-head.
our
So each week who wins? Yeah.
each week. Yeah, we are checking who got the highest point, and he was lucky 5 game weeks. That shouldn't have happened.
Yeah, FPL Trini, guy called Nick, says optimal wildcard in 8. We probably don't have enough time to discuss that, but a lot of what we've already discussed, we'll kind of, some of the players we've discussed bringing in this week, we'll have touched on that, so we'll leave that one. Jack, Bones FPL, in the fruitless search each week for more optimal solutions, we're constantly making questionable decisions. For example, models favouring a striker on a relegation candidate with a double versus a striker for the likely champions with a single. Yeah, Morris or Haaland, which one would you cap if you own them both set up?
So Jack actually asked this question because he knows that the more optimal as a phrase triggers me. Like because optimal by definition means the best. So more the best. Yeah, it just triggers me in general. But yes, so when it comes to optimal decision making, whichever model you're following, whichever player has the highest EV, that's the optimal one. But when we are saying optimal, we are optimizing for average case. So don't forget that we are optimizing for average case. In average, we expect Morris to get more points, for example. But there's also things called robust optimization, where you are trying to maximize your worst case scenario. And it's obvious that then if you are using robust optimization, then you need to captain Haaland because I mean at the worst case, I mean you will be moving with everyone else. So I don't mind going against Haaland, but yeah, if my ensemble data says Morris is ahead, I don't see a reason why not. That
Yeah.
I will captain him.
So do you always use that? Do you generally use that ensemble data to decide your captain, which is a mixture from models? And
I usually use FBI review at the end of the day because that's
Okay.
what Trout is using, so that he just tells me that do you want to choose this guy as the captain? I say yes. I haven't seen, but I'm always checking with ensemble data to see if there's a significant difference. So if review says that this guy is the best, but all the remaining models says that
Yeah.
that guy is not the best, then I will probably tell Trout that maybe we should consider this other guy. I don't feel comfortable, but so far, I mean, Mikhail Tokman's algorithm correlates quite a bit with FBI review. So usually ensemble data then pulls towards that direction anyway at the end of the day. So I haven't seen any like clear distinction so far, comparing review to my ensemble data.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. I think if it was me, I think I probably would captain Morris. For me, I think that's the best decision, but just based on review, it's really close. There's maybe like 0.2 EV in it. So if you have different expected mins, and we'd always encourage people to adjust that based on their own thoughts, then you could absolutely go for Haaland. I think either way you could go for Haaland. 0.2 is not a lot. And if you're just want to be a bit more risk averse, then that's absolutely that's fine.
Exactly.
Both are perfectly good decisions. Yeah, both of them.
Exactly.
Yeah, one more question from Onstat. A guy called Eric on Twitter. Do models prefer Son and Trippier or Salah and Cheap? As things stand, I rate Son as an alternative captain. I guess firstly on that one, I would say Son definitely is a good alternative captain in one of the game weeks in particular. I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head now. Game week 9, I think. I can't remember who's got Luton, I think, or Sheffield United, one of the two. No, Luton, he just played Sheffield United. So yeah, Son's absolutely a great option. But I would just say this is a very simple. It's a very A or B question for something that isn't like that. It's possible you could have 3 or 4 of those players. But yeah, if I had to choose, I would go Salah plus cheap in the long term for the next 7 or 8 game weeks. If I had to commit to one of those things, I would just go for Salah plus a cheaper Newcastle defender, for example. If it is just A or B. Great, I think we'll end it there. I just wanted to cover one more thing. For those of you who listen regularly or follow me on Twitter will know that I've not been on the podcast the last couple of weeks. My dad sadly is very unwell, and that's happened in the last couple of weeks. So I just wanted to thank everyone. I've had a lot of messages from people who listen to the podcast or follow me on Twitter. Just people being really kind and just seeing how I am. And I just really wanted to say thank you to people for that. Big thanks to kind of Seb and Ben and Luke for filling in and doing the podcast as well. I really appreciate it. And Dad is, just as a quick update, Dad, he has brain cancer, but in the last few days he had some successful surgery, so that's really good. And we're just trying to celebrate those little things along the way as well. So I really appreciate everyone's messages. It's been a really tough last few weeks. And on top of all those nice messages I've had, in fact, on the left, what you can see here is Dad's expected points versus his actual points, which is probably the worst graph you've ever seen. I included that just so coincidentally, while this all happened, my dad's FPL team went viral about 4 or 5 weeks ago because I shared it because it was so hilarious. And then when we found out this awful news, I thought, well, we discussed, can we make some good of a horrendous situation? So I'm doing this thing where I'm donating £1 to brain tumour research for every 5 points his team gets. And other people have just been making random one-off donations. So I just wanted to say a massive thanks for that as well. And I think, particularly on FPL Twitter, there's lots of bad things. Well, there are some bad things about the FPL community, not many. But I've kind of definitely seen the best of it in the last few weeks. So for anyone listening, in general, thanks so much for all those who have reached out to me as well. I really appreciate it. Thanks very much for that. Sertalp, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. We'll definitely have to get you on another time as well, either this season or another season. Just really, really, really insightful. For those of you who haven't listened to FPL Optimized podcast, please give that a listen as well. It's a really good podcast, and it's pretty different to this one because me and Luke, Seb, Ben, we find that we do a lot of agreeing with each other, which is a downside to the pod because we play in a similar way, whereas I think you guys have more disagreements, which is interesting in lots of ways as well. They're very different podcasts, so I would 100% listen to FPL Optimized. Really good pods. Thanks for joining, Sertalp. Anything you wanted to say just to finish?
No, but thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure and privilege to join you in this episode. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.